Order. Can we have a roll call, please?
Councilmember KESARWANI.
Yes, or here.
Working. DAVILA.
Present.
Councilmember Bartlett.
Present.
Harrison.
Here.
HAHN.
Present.
WENGRAF.
Present.
Robinson. Aye. DROSTE. Here. And Mayor ARREGUIN.
Present. All members are present. This is a special meeting of the City Council, so there will be no public comment on non-agenda items this evening. However, if you'd like to speak to any item on the agenda, we'll take public comment after the staff presentations. Before we go to the city manager on item 1, I'd like to recognize Councilmember Robinson for adjournments in memory.
So hoping we could adjourn tonight's meeting in memory of the victims of the shooting at the mosque in New Zealand over the weekend.
Councilor Dowd.
Yes, thank you. I'd like to also adjourn in memory of the 50 victims in Christchurch, New Zealand. It's a horrific event. We have to end Islamophobia, all the phobias, xenophobia, racism, all the isms. We can't live like this any longer. We have to deal with what's keeping us apart. So I'd like to adjourn in memory of all those. I went to 3 different memorials so far. One at that CARE, the Council of American Islamic Relations, had on Broadway and 14th on Friday evening, Saturday at the Pacifica Institute, and then last night at Lake Merritt that the Arab Resource Organizing Center organized. It's just incredible that we have to live in a country that promotes hate right now, and that there's hate being promoted around the world because of it. We have to do all that we can to come together, to unite and resist. Thank you.
Thank you. And last, and we'll certainly do a recognition at our regular council meeting next Tuesday, but last I'd like to adjourn tonight's city council meeting in honor of Rob Browning, the husband and former city council member Linda Maya, our dear colleague. Rob was a longtime community member, activist, and business leader in our community. And we learned Friday night from Councilmember Mayo that Rob passed away while they were on vacation in Mexico, and a very, very tragic situation. Our heart goes out to Linda and her family at this time, and I'd like to adjourn tonight's meeting, as well as next Tuesday's council meeting in honor of Rob Brown. Thank you. So we'll adjourn tonight's city council meeting in honor of all those individuals. So now I'd like to turn over to the city manager to introduce item 1, projections of future liabilities.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council. This is the 4th iteration of the Projections of Future Liabilities Report. In May of 2012, Council adopted a resolution. That resolution directed staff to prepare this report every 2 years in advance of the biennial budget process. And the purpose of this report is to provide in one place an overview of the city's long-term expenditure obligations and to review the city's current and future financial obligations, along with the underlying budget assumptions that we'll be moving forward with during the fiscal year 21 biennial budget process. Our goal here is clearly to ensure fiscal sustainability. I'd like to turn it over to Teresa, Berkeley-Simmons, our budget manager, and Henry Obiani, who's our finance director. Also joining us this evening for any questions later in the evening are our department heads and Deputy City Manager Paul Boonhager. Thank you. Teresa?
Can you hear me, please? So we're going to cover 4 key areas this evening: employee and retiree benefit costs, current city obligations, capital assets and infrastructure, and general fund revenue and expenditure projections. Before we get started, though, I want to identify and recognize the departments and the individuals who contributed to this report. This report is a massive undertaking, and it's a huge collaborative effort across operational departments. Key departments impacted are Public Works, Parks, Recreation, and Waterfront, the Information Technology Department, Human Resources, and of course, our Finance Department. And I just want to thank the department directors and their staff for all their help and hard work in helping us in pulling together this report and the information that's contained within. So starting with employee and retiree benefit costs. So this is a pie chart of the city's general fund. It's personnel costs compared with non-personnel costs. You can see in the FY19 adopted budget, personnel costs were 72% of the general fund expenditures. This has gone down. In 2017 and 2018, the personnel costs were actually 76%. So we went from 76% to 72%. It's projected to go up slightly in fiscal year 20 to 74%. This is the same chart but on an all funds basis. The general funds are discretionary, but this chart on an all funds basis includes the special funds. Special funds are restricted for a specific purpose, service, program, or activity, and can only be used for that purpose, the intended purpose. Again, in the special funds, the personnel costs are about 63% compared with non-personnel costs of 37%, again on an all funds basis. This chart just shows the ongoing increase in our CalPERS rates. CalPERS rates are increasing over time, and the amount that we are charged by CalPERS is based on our personnel costs. So these rates are multiplied basically by our personnel costs, and you can see as our personnel costs increase, so our dollar amounts as they are tied to these rates. Again, CalPERS is funded as a percent of payroll. On an all funds basis, you can see from fiscal year 19 to fiscal year 2029, with 0 COLAs, there will be an increase in CalPERS payments of $27.3 million. The rates start to plateau in around fiscal year 25-26, and decline is estimated to begin in fiscal year 31. This is the funded status of 3 plans. So miscellaneous is funded at 71.6%, police at 61.2%, and fire at 71.8%. The unfunded total liability for our CalPERS plans combined is $503.7 million. Our council has taken action to help us manage our unfunded liabilities. They've directed staff to establish an IRS Section 115 pension trust fund to help pre-fund pension obligations. This contract will be coming to council in April 2019 for approval. Council also allocated an additional $4 million in November 2018 to fund the new IRS Section 115 pension plan. So the total set aside to fund this plan is actually $7.9 million. And in fiscal year 19, council approved or authorized us to pre-fund the CalPERS pension, which resulted in a savings totaling $1.1 million. Before I go on to the next slide, I just want to define a couple of terms. So actuarially determined contribution, ACD, is what our actuary recommends that we contribute to the plan. Pay-as-you-go is when you only pay the current benefit expense. The reason you want to fund on the actuarially determined contribution because with that contribution, it will earn interest and it will better enhance funding of the plan. Pay-as-you-go, we do pay-as-you-go when it is not affordable for us to actually pay the ADC, which you'll see shortly. So looking at our other post-employment benefits, we have 5 plans. The first plan is our police employee retiree income plan. That's actually now a closed plan. Because it is a closed plan, we don't receive an ADC or an actuarially determined contribution amount. We actually contribute 1.86, which is our payout amount, because we pay this on a pay-as-you-go plan. And it is actually only 8.7% funded. Again, this is a closed plan. That plan was replaced by the plan below it, which is a new plan. The actuarially determined contribution is $4.93 million. We actually contributed $300,000 to the plan because the 4.93 was not affordable. But the actual payout was $226,000. So this is a plan we're funding as the safety member pension fund costs reduce. We move that money to help fund this plan. So over time, we've actually generated assets doing that of $1.8 million. So this plan is currently 4.1% funded. If you move on to the next plan, the fire plan, again, the actually determined contribution is 2.16. The actual contribution was $740,000, but the payout was only $409,061. These plans are funded in accordance with our MOU. They're negotiated rates, and that is how they're budgeted, and that's how they're funded. And you see the last plan, the non-safety plan, again, the actually determined contribution is $4.73 million. The actual contribution is $2 million, and the payout was just under $1 million and $927,000. That plan is 42.4% funded. The safety member pension fund is a closed plan, and those benefit expenditures reduce over time as members no longer become eligible for payment. This chart is here to just demonstrate the impacts of benefits, only the benefits over time. The funds, the salaries are held at 0 COLAs beginning in FY20, and it shows the rate of increase of the cost of our benefits over time. So from fiscal year 19 to fiscal year 2029, we go from 68% benefit costs to 113% benefit costs. This again is on an all funds basis. I'll turn it over to Henry to talk about our city's debt obligations.
Thank you. Thank you, Teresa. The slide that you see is just to give you a current debt obligations that the city currently has. This does not include anything we have not offered in terms of bond offering. This just shows exactly what we have as of close of fiscal year 2018. And there are just 5 general obligation bonds that we have. We have measure FF, we have measure M, we have measure T, which we've only sold $35 million of, and we have the refunding bond that we did 2 years ago for measure G, S, and I. So the total authorization that we have is $192 million, and the current amount outstanding is $170 million. This is just to give us an idea of what the current debt profile that we have in the city is.
Next, we'll talk about our capital assets and infrastructure. As Henry mentioned, the voters approved several actions to support the funding of our capital assets and infrastructure. Measure M was a $30 million bond. Measure F for the parks tax, maintenance, and capital increased the annual contribution by $750,000 per year. And most recently, T1, which was $100 million general obligation bond. Okay, our beautiful parks, waterfront, pools, and camps. Parks, Recreation, and Waterfront operates, maintains, and manages 52 parks, 4 community centers, 2 clubhouses, 2 pools, 3 resident camps, 15 sports fields, 49 sports courts, 63 play areas, 36 picnic areas, 35,000 street trees and park trees, and 152 landscape street mediums, triangles, 263 street irrigation systems, and 29 restrooms and outbuildings. In addition, our Parks, Recreation, and Waterfront Department operates and maintains the Berkeley waterfront and its related facilities, including the docks, parking lots, trails, and other infrastructure, including like adventure playground. Also at the marina is a 1,000-boat and berth rental. The majority of the unfunded needs are at the waterfront, where many of the docks, pilings, buildings, parking lots, and streets have reached the end of their useful life. The city has begun a long-term planning effort with the Berkeley Marina Area Specific Plan to establish the community's vision for the waterfront and a plan for making the marina viable and stable. Next, we have our Public Works Department. Public Works is less than 3% of the general fund allocation, but on an all funds basis, it's 29% of the city's budget. It's the largest department in the city. The Public Works Department is responsible for the maintenance of 95 facilities, not including the library or facilities leased by other entities. Although the public buildings are supported from a variety of city funds, the cost for routine maintenance, major maintenance, and capital improvements far exceeds currently existing sources of funds. The estimated cost for our facility needs within the next 5 years is $85 million. Also in Public Works are streets and road repairs. And on May 29, 2012, Council included a goal of a PCI of 75 in 5 years. It is estimated that the city would need to allocate an additional $120 million to achieve a PCI of 70 within 10 years. $50 million would need to be added to the $120 million to represent the full cost of improving streets to comply with the city's complete streets policy. And sidewalks, also under Public Works. The city manages sidewalk repair programs to keep the city sidewalks safe and provide for safe pedestrian passage, including making safe repairs, annual proactive and responsive repair programs, and the city's 50/50 replacement cost share program, in which the city shares the liabilities and costs for broken sidewalks with the property owners. The backlog of sidewalk repairs identified through the 50/50 program has grown significantly beyond the funding capacity. It would require about $7 million to close the 50/50 program funding gap and to address the backlog within the next 5 years CIP schedule. And we have our sewer. In 2014, the city, along with East Bay Mud and other agencies, concluded negotiations with the Environmental Protection Agency and the Department of Justice for violation of the Clean Water Act and agreed to a stipulated settlement known as the Final Consent Decree. To comply with the consent decree, the city is required to rehabilitate an average of 4.2 miles of sewer pipeline annually based on a 3-year rolling average. The city is currently on track to meet the rehabilitation mileage targets with revenues generated from sanitary sewer fees. However, the cost per mile for sewer construction have increased significantly since the rate study was completed. A system test is scheduled to be conducted in 2022, and based on the results of this test, a better assessment of liabilities will be determined in the next unfunded liabilities report. Next are storm drains. The city's engineered storm drains include approximately 78 miles of underground pipes, manholes, catch basins, and cross drains. Much of the stormwater infrastructure is over 80 years old and needs substantial rehabilitation, and there is a backlog. The city desires to address these issues while forwarding its policies to improve the environment by pursuing low-impact development methods. According to the Watershed Management Plan, the total unfunded need of the stormwater system is approximately $204 million. Staff projects an additional need of $37 million over the next 5 years. $5 million in unfunded maintenance needs and $32 million for projected capital improvement needs. And then we have our traffic signals. The city currently has 141 traffic signals which are maintained by Public Works, including lights at intersections and pedestrian push buttons. There's also a backlog here with a need of $7.4 million. Lastly, our information technology department has an unfunded need of about $550,000. The city is making significant investments in our technology, including replacement of our core enterprise system, which is funds. Two critical projects that are currently unfunded are one, the replacement of our data backup system with a more stable and expandable solution, and two, our master address database to provide consistent, accurate address and parcel data. This information is needed for permitting, fire inspections, assessments, and more. So when the projections of future liabilities report was initially published in 2013, Council requested that staff include long-term revenue projections in the reports, in addition to the expenditure projections. So let's take a look at our general fund projections. The chart above provides a summary of total general fund revenues projected through 2029. The projections were determined by finance in conjunction with consultants who are familiar with the city's historical revenue growth and economic conditions. We've limited our projections to general funds because those are the funds which we have the most discretion in terms of allocation. This pie chart shows the percent of contributions of the various sources of general fund revenue streams in fiscal year 19. Our greatest revenue stream is tied to property taxes. It comprises 33% of our general fund revenues. This slide is just a projection of projected surplus or deficit over the next 10 years. The general funds do not include U1, which is from rental housing business license tax, and estimated to be about $5 million in fiscal year 20 and 21. Nor does it include Measure P funding, which is estimated to be about $6 million a year in fiscal year 20 and fiscal year 21. And it's the baseline of $12.5 million set in excess property transfer tax. So it does not include the excess that might be realized during this period of time. Okay, now we'll open up to any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to suggest we go to public comment, and then we can ask questions or make comments on the side. So is there any public comment on item 1, projections of future liabilities? Now's the time. Any public comment?
Mayor and Council, my name is Charles Clark. I reside in District 6. And I'm struck by how when we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars, the public attendance is fairly sparse. So with that latitude, I'll just say what I think I sense the council believes, which is that addressing unfunded liabilities, for example, by way of the Section 115 Pension Trust Fund is a good idea. I'm certainly in favor of that. I think my major question actually is more in the way of a clarification of what a particular attachment is telling us. I'm looking specifically at page 34 of 37 in the item entitled Capital Assets Infrastructure. It's attachment 3, and I believe it's actually attachment 3A to the item. Unfortunately, there doesn't seem to be a lot of backup detail to the capital and maintenance needs that are identified for the city. So, for example, parks, park buildings, pools, waterfront, and camps, the total is $181,535,800. And it's not clear to me, just reading this, what's all behind that. I guess that's a roll-up of the items below it, but to say there's $170 million need for streets and road looking further down, it would be helpful, I think, to the reader, certainly to this reader, what the level of assessment is that generates the $170 million number. Truthfully, I can appreciate that the roads are in bad shape, and it's not up to the standard the council has set. But I think it was just a little bit of background detail to how to get to the 170, just to know there's a statement of the size of the problem. It would be helpful to be able to map the number, 170 million, to the perceived improvement condition you would get if you were to have the 170 million.
Thank you very much. Is there any other public comment on this item? Okay, seeing no other public comment, bring it back to the City Council. Open on the discussion and then go to Councilor Davila. So I want to thank our city staff and our actuary for this report. It provides a rather sobering picture of our capital needs and our unfunded employee benefit liabilities, which we're beginning to put in place policies and funding streams to be able to address. I have a few questions. So I was on the City Council when the council voted to initiate this biennial report, and I think one of the sort of main goals that we wanted was to not only understand our liabilities in terms of benefits and capital liabilities, but to have really a complete snapshot of all the future liabilities in one spreadsheet. And so that was going to be one of my suggestions, whether that could be provided as an off-agenda item, and certainly for future presentations, the City Council, having all this presented in one spreadsheet so we can get kind of in totality what is the actual cost, I think would be very beneficial. I just wanted to point out that the slide and also in the report, the projections of city debt obligations does not include projections of the new measure of bond authorization that the voters approved in November. So that is going to increase the amount of indebtedness that the city has. But one slide that we've often received, when we have presentations leading up to discussions on potential ballot measures, is the chart that shows what is the maturity of all the bonds and taxes, because it's not a fixed thing over an indefinite period of time. Some of these taxes and bonds are going to mature. And so I think, as we are considering the potential for new revenue measures to address these hundreds of millions of dollars of unfunded liabilities, it's important to keep in mind how we structure those potential revenue measures as those bonds and taxes are maturing. I just want to note that medical costs are expected to go up 2.79 times, while CalPERS rates will grow 1.52 times. So medical costs are seeing significant increases, and I just want to call attention to the slide number 13 about the CalPERS and other post-employment benefits. CalPERS has set a goal of reaching 100% funded status in 30 years. The area where there's significant concern on my part is the OPEB, the other post-employment benefits, and particularly the retiree medical plans. Both the police plans are significantly underfunded. And so I guess my question is, do we have any ideas around how obviously with the existing plan, it's contributions that are negotiated through the MOUs, but for the closed plan, do we have any ideas of how we can, begin to address that unfunded liability?
I think one of the things we've been trying to do is it GASB 74, or I think it's 75, that we are going to implement this year, that is going to take the OPEB and put it into our CAFRA. So when we see the reports coming up at the end of the year, it's even going to be worse, because now all we have is GASB 68 that has just the pension. When we implement that, then what GASB is trying to say is trying to tell us that we need to really look at all those liabilities that we have, that we've always put into the notes. They're not really in the balance sheet. And we need to start figuring out how we need to address them. So one of the things that we're thinking of doing with OPM is probably to have another trust, which they do have. CalPERS has been trying to be one of those people that can actually provide those kind of trust because they don't have it. Only 3 companies have them now. And they've been trying to push us to see whether we can lobby on their behalf to see whether they can do it. But I'm not sure how good it would be for us to have all our eggs in one basket and just have CalPERS do the pension, CalPERS do the 115 trust. And so they've been looking at other ways where we can figure it out. And another thing we can do is we should be mindful when we're doing our negotiations with our employees. They need to contribute more. Everything needs to be on the table, and we need to tell them, we need your help. This is a partnership, it's all your benefits, and maybe there's a way that we can start clawing back at some of these huge benefits that we have. Those are the 3 things that typically many agencies are trying to do.
Thank you. And then on slide 18, regarding the unfunded capital needs for the Parks Department, there's a $109 million figure for current unfunded needs for the waterfront. I see our Director of Parks and Recreation and Waterfront is here. Could you remind us about what does that $109 million account for? I know that we're funding some, improvements in University Avenue, and there's some roadway projects and other improvements that we're either going to be funding through Measure T1 or we may be funding through the upcoming budget process. I just want to get a sense of what does that unfunded need represent?
It includes a wide variety of things: piers, pilings, docks, streets. The Berkeley Pier, for instance, is on there. We have a placeholder for $25 million, and then kind of everything else in the range that you can think of. So, His Lordship's is not on there. Oh, yes, actually it is. We added it to it because it's now our building. So we have a $3.5 to $4 million need there. So it's throughout the waterfront. So, and we've got our detailed list, which we'll send to everybody, either in an off agenda or we'll send it to all the council members. That details every line by line, every cost.
Thank you. That would be very helpful. I know that there were some immediate improvements that you had identified in the memo that we received several months ago that we'll certainly discuss as we begin the discussion of the June budget. And then there were some large capital projects, some of which we're beginning to actually plan to address. So for example, the MOU with RITA for planning for a ferry and improved pier could help us fund through city and regional funding sources, replacement of the municipal pier, the road improvements that we're funding with Measure T1, and then the community benefit contribution that the Doubletree will provide. So we are making some progress. While this is a large number, I want people to understand that we're not ignoring the problem. We're actually working to begin to make investments, but clearly more investments need to be made.
Right. That request was focused totally on the actual marina itself, so the pilings and the finger docks and a lot of the stuff that's associated with the boats.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much.
Mr. Mayor, if I can just add.
Yes, ma'am.
So in the report, there is a link to a March 2017 complete list of projects listed out for the parks, unfunded capital and major maintenance needs. So it's embedded in the report. If you click on it, you can find it, but it is listed out for our community so that we can go in and look at those. That list actually had a total amount of 119. So I know we made some allocations towards some of the work at the marina, but I think it's, I'm sorry, it's 112,134,000 in the report. But there is a list.
Which page is that, Michael?
So that is on page, one second here.
Okay, while you're providing that information, I'll continue with my questions. Thank you, Mr. Chris. So on the general fund revenue projections on slide 22, I was curious about what were the assumptions used in these projections? What was the assumed growth rate? Because we've seen significant growth in some general fund revenues, such as transfer tax revenues. And more than what we've actually projected in the budget. We actually use pretty conservative projections, which is, I think, probably the fiscally prudent thing to do, but we've seen more significant revenue growth than we had initially estimated. So I'm curious about what were the assumptions used in the general fund revenue projections?
It depends on each of the revenues. What city does, I just want to say something. During last year, when we were having when we were in negotiations with our employees, we did presentations for them because they did not believe that our projections was actually correct. And in the projections we did for them, we did a 10-year backward historical numbers where what the projection was and what the actual numbers were. And they were like between 2 to 3% between the last 10 years. And I think we had that report somewhere, but I'll make sure it's in the budget this year. So everybody could look at how good we've been doing in terms of our projections. This is when we're talking about just the baseline. We do a projection baseline for our transfer tax at 12.5. So we do not project for that because any excesses of those goes to you guys to come back to the excess. So, but the projections apart from those, they've been about 3 to 4% either plus or minus. So it's been a consistent one. Now, going back to how we do projections, it depends on each of the revenue streams. If it's property-based, which is the county gives us their idea of what their projections are, and they give us based on their historical numbers, and we plug it in. We do a little bit of, we don't really do that much of a massaging of those. Whatever they say it is, we probably give it to them. In March next week, they will give us the projections that they think we should use for our coming budget. And those projections are exactly what they think it would be. So they look at their projections, they come up with their numbers, and they give it to us. And we automatically just add it to it because we thought they're the experts. So that comes with that. For transfer tax, we do a little bit of asking some of the industry. We call and find out what they think their projections will land, how we are in terms of the economy, in terms of how the sales of the properties are, and then we come up with a projection. But because we don't need to do the actual projection because of the 12.5 cap, so we do still do the projections, which we capped it at $18 million last year, and we came out at 18.1. So we're pretty close in those. Then we talk about the UUT tax. We actually pick up the phone, we call PG&E, we call Pacific Bell, we call all the people that actually give us the funds for the UUT to give us their projections. So they give us the projections and we use those projections, and that's how we come to that. TOT taxes. We pick up the 10 biggest hotels we have in the city, we call them and ask for their projections. We look at those projections, we calculate them, and that's how. So each of the stream, we ask those industries to give us what their projections are, and that's how we come up with our projections.
Okay. Now, are we including in the TOT the short-term rental taxes, or are we sort of separating that out?
Those are separate. We're separating those out. We keep track of those new TOT taxes and short-term rentals to have different line items, and we look at them and we project for them separately.
And I mean, I think it's important to know we have a new hotel that's going to be opening up in a couple of years, which is going to generate more TOT. There may be another hotel at some point in the future. Hopefully, we can consider the idea of a new hotel at the waterfront. So, as we're building new housing, as we're bringing in new hotels, that's increasing the tax base. That definitely changes the revenue picture to some degree. I look forward to the report 2 years from now, because with Measure T1 and with some of the projects that we're funding, we're going to see a decrease in some of those. I'm assuming that those unfunded costs assume some sort of cost escalation, right?
Yes.
Of the actual amount needed to make the improvements.
Yes, they do. There's an assumption that we have the cost of living adjustment that goes up, so most of our expenditures will probably go up. But there are some that actually, that might not be, might not be marginal increase, they might not go up as high as we think they will. So it depends on each of the expenditures that we have.
And I'll thank you, my colleagues, for giving this time. I'm gonna just wrap up. So we're significantly under bonded compared to other local governments and agencies. And I just think as we're thinking about ways for us to generate, a significant amount of revenue to fund some of these major capital projects, that's something to consider. We did revenue bonds for the garage. I think we need to think about bonding as an additional option for us to make a significant impact in some of these capital projects. The longer we wait to address these projects, the more it's going to cost us and the more degradation of our infrastructure. So I think it's something we absolutely need to consider, as well as ways to generate additional revenue, grants, ways to leverage funding opportunities. And then lastly, on the options, not only do we need to explore the idea of an OPEB trust, as you had mentioned, Henry, but we have two options that were presented. One was setting aside the first $1 million of the extra transfer tax revenue to go towards the Section 115 trust, and the other is 50% of the salary savings. I think, from my perspective, whichever one will yield the most to the trust, I think we should pursue. Obviously, the downside of salary savings is that that gives us much flexibility to be able to fund one-time expenses, but I think whatever is the mechanism by which it would yield the most money to the Section 115 trust, we should certainly consider. I'll just, in closing, note that in the last couple of years, this council's taken, I think, unprecedented steps to address our unfunded liabilities. We adopted a general fund reserve policy, and we are, I think, at 18% of our general fund revenues to our reserve, with the goal of reaching 30%. We are making progress towards reaching our 30% general fund reserve goal. And we've already been able to use some of those reserve funds to be able to fund things like the improvements at Camp Tuolumne. We established our Section 115 trust, which will earn interest and will be something to help address the rate fluctuations that we may see in the future. And then we're certainly working on pursuing other strategies, as well as making a significant investment in our unfunded capital needs through the Measure T1 bond program. So we are making progress. There clearly is a lot more that we have to do, but I just want to commend the City Council and the City Manager for and the departments for all the work that we're doing to begin to make progress. It's going to take time, but we need to make progress. Madam City Manager.
So, Mr. Mayor, just to make sure we're really clear on the observers, I believe the 18% was our stated goal in terms of reaching it.
It was actually 16.7% by the year 2020.
We had a higher
We
level,
exceeded that.
a high level of intent to move towards
30%.
We never set a goal for that.
But we're making progress.
Yes, we are.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilor Dowd.
Thank you for the report. I had a couple questions. One was on item number 1, on page 5 of 131. It talked about the certificate of participation. Could you define or explain that a little bit?
We only have one, and that is that was what we used for the animal shelter. One of the things that happened that we use COP for is that there is a 218 mandate that anytime the city borrows money, we need to go to the citizens to get it. And this is the only loophole, I think, that we have that shows that if there is a lease revenue that we can get from a building that we actually build, we can use it to pay for it. And that was the only way we used to build the animal shelter. So the COP is just a way of using a what we call a joint powers board to be able to borrow the money and then get the lease, we pay the lease and pick it up the COP. But we only have one, and that's the animal shelter.
Okay, great, thank you. Not that that helped me, but maybe it did, I'll have to think about it. So then, and then on page 6, 2 of 31, it talked under 4AII, it talked about the 5 years, and I was just curious why on the first page you talk about a 10-year horizon. Why don't you do 10 years for both? It's on page page 6, sorry. It just talks about for projected maintenance costs over the next 5 years, and then the budget over 5 years, but on the first page, you talk about a 10-year horizon. So I was just curious as to why you don't use the same amount of years for both?
I'm trying to find.
Yeah.
Which
Well,
is
it's
on
fine.
page 6 of 37.
Yeah.
I'm trying to find the page.
It's just page 1 and page 2 of the item number 1. Under the summary of capital assets and infrastructure, including, you talk about 5 years, but on page 1, you talk about a 10-year horizon, so I was just,
For the projections, that was what we were directed to do by council. So that was council's specific request at the time.
It just seems like you should be doing the same to me, but whatever, okay. And then, let's see. I was curious as to why under, Measure O is not included in any of the current information.
That's a good question. This is because the name of the report is projected future. It's the liabilities that we currently have. So we haven't issued the bond yet, and so it's not on our books. We haven't done anything with it. So we couldn't put anything that is not a liability on the report. But we would note that next time when we come in 2 years, if we have sold any bond, then it is going to be a liability that we're going to put it in. The numbers we use here are actually what do we have? What is this city's current liability profile? What do we actually owe now as we speak? And that was why that was in here, and that was the report that we have. But I mean, we could add it to it if you guys want. So we just haven't sold any of the bonds yet. And you can even see T1 is only have $35 million, which is the only thing we've actually offered and sold.
Councilor Devlin, I believe the city manager wants to respond to your question.
I just want to add, so when we do go out for this bond, to draw down on this bond, or actually to even get a bond rate for it, we can share this chart again. We can update the chart once we have the additional information and just send that out to council. And we can do that as soon as we go out.
Okay, also, I was just looking on page 16 or 12 of 31, and it talked about the cost of, I guess, benefits. I don't have the page in front of me right now, but I'll only get to it. But anyway, it talked about 359.8 and then 265.9, but it didn't tell you what the difference was, which is 93 million. I guess that's what the cost of the benefits are. It would be nice if you could calculate that information. And then, yeah, let's see. I think the other points I wanted to raise have been raised, so I'm gonna go with that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Harrison.
Thank you, Teresa and Henry, for this really helpful report. We've gotten information in the past, as you mentioned, about trends from the past and what we projected as expenditures and what we projected as revenues and how those actuals compare to those projections. It would be very helpful in this report to include that in the future, because we give reports at different times and they have different elements, so I was looking for that. I have one question about pension obligations. Most of my questions are about capital costs. On pension obligations, on the CalPERS and other post-employment benefits, you indicated that sometimes we do pay-as-you-go because we cannot afford to pay on the ARC. But these plans are all different levels. So for example, the general miscellaneous plan, the the ARC would actually be 4.73 million, we're paying 2 million. And for the police employees retiree health, the ARC would be 4.93 and we're paying 0.3. Why do we make those differences? Why is it not like an even percent of all of them?
Each union negotiates their MOU, so the actual funding mechanism is tied to the negotiated amount included in the MOU. And it varies by bargaining unit.
Okay. But what I'm saying is we're looking at, if we were to fund ARC, it would be X number, and if we were to fund pay-as-you-go, it's Y. Wouldn't we keep that constant regardless of what benefits we were paying to people? Do you see what I mean? It feels like we're paying down some of these plans more quickly than others. That's what I'm trying to understand. This is on page 13. You can get back to me on this one. This is kind of a technical question.
Thank you. I think we're going to want to take a look at, some of these do not have actuaries, but some of them do. I think it is truly about what we can budget and also what we negotiate, what's been negotiated in your MOUs. I don't think we have the opportunity to truly, we can do more if council so chooses, but we can't drop down less.
So, it's also tied to, it's also a percentage of payroll. So every unit has a different payroll amount, so police is higher than fire, and based on the rate, the negotiated rate, the contribution will be more or less based on salary or payroll.
Okay, okay. I had a question about the current vacancy rate. I did note that one of your recommendations is to take the salary savings from vacant positions and use half of it for some of our unfunded liabilities. So can you tell me what the current vacancy rate is right now, or what the dollars are in vacancies?
So the rate is about 16% right now.
Vacancy rate is 16?
As of March,
Okay.
this year, it's 16%.
Okay.
And of course, it fluctuates throughout the year. We're having a really difficult time hiring staff. So in the past, it averaged about 8%, I would say, and now it's double that. We're really being challenged with hiring staff now, so that's why it's so high.
Okay, and the reason I ask that is I'm worried about setting a policy that says we're always going to take half the vacancy amount and apply it to that. I think it has to vary depending on how we're doing. So this year, we're having a very hard time hiring. It might be a good year to deal with the pension obligation. Next year, you might be in a 3% vacancy, and we don't necessarily want to take that money because you might be able to hire up. So I don't want to set a set, I guess my recommendation is not to set that as a set percent, but each year look at that as a source. I hope that makes sense. On the bond rate, I think the mayor referred to this. We have a very favorable bond rate right now. It's about $50, per person per $100,000, and it used to be $95. And it's about $800 per person, and it used to be $1,200 per person. So we can see the amount, both in absolute terms, dollar terms, is going down, and as a share of property values is going down. So this is partly what I think the mayor was alluding to in terms of trying to bond more. I don't think we're at a point of being over bonded. I think we're at a point compared to other cities, particularly in other organizations, of being at a fairly reasonable rate where we could do more. I'm not saying a ton more, but we could do more. And one of the suggestions of the Vision 2050 committee, I'm on the finance committee, is to in fact do that, to try to bond against some more of our revenues and try to buy down some of this capital obligation, because it's only gonna get more expensive. And it's not like the roads are gonna repair themselves. So I just feel that's something we should really be focused on. And I'm sure this will come up during 2050.
I think if I can suggest also, it would be a good idea for us to have our financial advisors and bond folks come in and give a deep analysis on what that looks like for the city, and look at things over time and what our obligations are today and what our future maturities are, and how we can actually draw any additional funding and funding that we can in the city. One of the things we always want to consider is our bond rating and how much we have in our liquidity. We want to look at those things, but we want to make sure that we have someone give us a real analysis of it.
Right. Yeah, because I just know that'll be coming back to us as a recommendation, so I would like to be prepared for that when it happens. On also with the Vision 2050 group, there's been a representation that there's quite a healthy fund balance of unallocated fund balance, and I always have a hard time reading these numbers. So when we have that discussion about do we have room to bond, I'd like to know more about that and how that works. I think that, when we look at capital, we can see that our percentage needs are just not getting met in almost every category except sewers, where we've increased the amount of money coming in. We're falling further and further behind, and it's an area that I think we really need to specifically focus on. And again, this is where the recommendation to look at all of our revenue streams. For example, for roads, the auto license fee, trying to bond against that possibly as a stream to help us repair our roads. It comes in. I think it's an important thing for us to be thinking about. I also wanted to ask about the reserve because I am a little confused. We had aimed for 16.5% with a long-term goal of 30%. We're at about 18% right now. Is there any downside to being over the target we have, the current target? Is there a downside to being, I think you mentioned to me at a meeting, there might be a downside to being at 18% instead of 16.5%.
Well, no, there's no downside. I think that if we can achieve even greater reserve levels, I think that's where we should head as a city, because I do anticipate that there will be future needs for reserves, and we see that now, especially with catastrophic reserves, where we've needed those for park issues, especially around our camps. So I do think we need to be frugal, and we need to actually get to the 30 at some point. It may not be where we're sitting here on this, but I certainly think we should aim there, and we should continue trying to build on that.
Okay, great, thank you. And then my last question is about revenues. A lot of places in the report you said, we know these revenues are too low, what we put in as a projection, that the actuals are gonna come out higher. I think that was stated for transfer tax, sales tax, secured property tax. And so I'd like to know, when are we going to get updated revenue numbers? Because that seems to be an area where we're not keeping up with what we think we might actually have.
So do you mean for FY20 and FY21? They'll be part of the budget presentation.
Okay.
And some of those revenues are, council has earmarked for specific purposes or tied to projects or programs like U1 and some of those things. So we're not including it as part of the baseline.
Right.
But that information will come to you as part of the budget.
Yeah, I wasn't thinking so much about those. I have a specific question about that though. There was no mention of the soda tax. Is it included in here or excluded? It's included, even though U1 isn't included.
Correct.
So we're treating them.
And expenditures are tied to soda tax revenue as well.
And why are we treating those two differently, since they were voted on the same kind of way?
The expenditures tied to soda tax were identified, whereas we didn't identify target expenditures for them.
Okay, great. And the other revenues are referred to are all ones that are not tied to specific things, except for possibly the increase, the transfer tax over the 12.5 million. Is that included in here?
That is not.
And so what is it right now? How much have we collected?
In FY19?
Yeah.
Second item, what revenue stream are you talking about?
Excess property transfer tax.
We have 11.9.
How much? I'm sorry?
11.9.
11.9 over and above the 12.5.
No, we
No.
have 11.9
Of
as the
the-
actual.
Okay, great.
So
Through what date? That's through.
as of 31st.
Okay, so we're looking at if it was even, right? We're looking at about 24 million.
Yeah, so we have a projection for 18 million, so we're looking at about $7 million between now and June 30
Okay,
as projected.
and the intention was that half of that excess would go to the reserve. Is that
Yes.
right? And then
Yes.
half would go to capital.
Yes.
So this is just a question we're gonna have to re-explore and just decide how we're gonna balance it. And then my very last question, I promise, is are the short-term rental revenues in here?
No.
They're not in your projection. You said they were separate from the other.
Yes.
And they're not in here. So how much have we collected there?
They're in the baseline.
Okay,
The short-term rental so far is $870,000. $870,000.
and that's as of December as well.
That's also December.
Okay, great. Thank you both very much.
Thank you, Councilmember Hahn.
Thank you so much. Is that on?
Yes.
I was finding these snapshots a little daunting. It's always $1 billion. And I have to remind myself that it's kind of like if you were a family and you sat down at the kitchen table once a year and or every 2 years, and you said, okay, let's just like look at everything we owe and everything we need to spend in the next 10 or 20 years. We've got our student loans and we've got our mortgage and we've got our credit cards and, wow, that adds up to like a lot of money. And then, we're gonna have to redo the roof and we're gonna have to paint, the house, and then we're gonna have to pay for college. And if you just sat down and you wrote all those things up and you looked at them at once, it would be some huge number that far exceeds what your combined salaries are bringing in. But we have to take a deep breath and remember that what we're looking at here is money that we're going to have to spend or pay back over time. It's not all due today. And I think when we have these snapshots, it kind of knocks you off balance because you kind of feel like, well, where are we going to get that kind of money? It's okay. Our job is to figure out over time, as those obligations are due on our debts, and as the expenses that we see before us, the roof, the paint, the college, come due or come to us, will we be ready to pay them? So that's kind of what I tell myself when I finish reading a report like this, is that that's really the exercise that we're engaged in here today. So I kind of think about the pension and healthcare liabilities different from the capital, and let's call each of them about $500 million. Makes it easier to talk about. On the pensions and the healthcare, you guys presented to us a really great plan about 2 years ago now, the OPEB trusts. And I know we opened one, but if I understood correctly, we would need to open more. And I think that we really need to maybe go back and review that presentation again and think about how we can plan around the kitchen table, so to speak. How are we going to get all those trusts in place? How are we going to set ourselves up so that we're putting the money aside so that when those obligations come due, we're in a position to meet them? I think it's great that we've started, it's great that we funded, but we need to go back to the whole picture and we need to start planning more affirmatively. And I don't know, Madam City Manager, if you have a timeline for when we can review that in a more comprehensive way and better understand everything we need to do on that piece.
Well, we certainly need to look at our actuary, our next study, to make sure our numbers are in line, but we can always revisit that. I think it was a pretty large number. It was anywhere from $4 to $8 million that we were talking about annually if you were to try and aggressively go after this. It's a pretty hefty number, but we certainly can go back and look at this and maybe look at a timeline of how we can apply some of those things that we have not, recommendations that we have not put in place. We can do that.
I personally, and I don't know if my colleagues would agree, but I would like us to take that presentation that you gave us and the ideas that were presented, which I think we were all really interested in, and turn that into a plan so that as we come to our budgeting year to year or every 2-year cycle, we know, well, here's what it would take. And maybe we start figuring that into our budgets up front, especially where we are, because the economy's been strong, we've been kind of chronically underestimating the amount of money that we have, and I understand that's prudent, but it also suggests to me that we might have $4 or $8 million a year, at least now. And when we leave that money and it ends up being unallocated, then we're limited in what we can use it for. Whereas if we had more aggressive revenue projections, slightly more, we could actually budget in these payments. Does that make sense? Or did I miss something?
Well, I think we actually project our revenues pretty aggressively. We're well below the industry standard, which is around 5%. We come in anywhere from 2 to 3% on our projected revenues, with the exception of transfer tax dollars, which our baseline is where we go there, it's a 12.5. Anything above that, you already have a policy on. But clearly, I think we are doing a fabulous job projecting the revenues. So I don't know that there's a lot of excess in that conversation.
Okay, well, the main point here is that I'd like to see the plan, because without having it in front of us, we're not really able to act on it. And I would like us to have the information to be able to act every time we're looking at our budget. We can act in relation to the monies that we need to set aside in the trust so that we can make those future obligations. So the other $500 million, so to speak, is our capital expenses. And I guess I will echo the statements of some of my colleagues that I think we really need to take a closer look. We know this is money we need to spend, and we know it's capital expenditures. We know that waiting escalates costs, just straight up inflation, but we also know that some things, the longer we put them off, the base cost, it exponentially increases. Certainly we know that for roads that drop from the kind of mid-grade to the lower grade, all of a sudden it's 300 times more to repave the road. So delay has a lot of costs. And in some areas, I think it has more costs than others, but I guess I just don't really see a really strong argument for delay if we are able to responsibly float more bonds, which is the same as borrowing more money, getting a second mortgage, or whatever, to fix that roof or paint the house. So I think we need to look at how to be a little bit more discerning. What capital expenses should we really not be delaying, because the cost of capital is lower than the increase in cost of waiting. And I really would support doing more to move ahead and address our capital needs. And our capital needs are not, I think sometimes out in public you hear people say, well, we've neglected. We haven't maintained, and that's why things are falling apart. Well, that may be true in some areas, but in general, no matter how much you maintain your roof, eventually you're going to have to replace it. And that's a lot of what we're seeing in Berkeley, is things just wearing out. They're getting to the end of their life. And there's no reason for us to not make those investments. So I'm looking forward to what the 2050 plan looks like. I know that's going to be a really thoughtful process, but my guess is there's a lot of things we could already agree we should be fixing even without that bold plan. And so I'm really interested in going deeper and better understanding what is worth doing now and how much more money we can raise to do it. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Robinson.
Good evening. I'll try not to be too redundant. Most of my questions were already asked. Thank you both for your presentations. It's deeply helpful. Just trying to sort of figure out the prioritization philosophy here. I think there's obviously a deep appreciation for the importance of our retirement and our infrastructure costs. But looking at the options to address long-term retirement and infrastructure costs we lay out on page 24 and 25, they seem to pretty consistently either speak just to the pension issue or to pension and infrastructure explicitly in that order. After the first million, then put monies for the capital infrastructure needs. And I was just wondering if that's born out of the sense that that is the prioritization we should have, and that it's more urgent that we try to fund the pension need, or if that's born out of just an expectation that we can keep turning to the voters for infrastructure bonds, or somewhere in between.
So that is a really tough question. But I do believe that it is a conversation that has to be taken in totality with our bond counsel, or at least our financial advisors, and looking at what we've already worked on with our actuary and the report that we came back, and trying to look at those two things in conjunction. So I would say we don't have an order for you to say this is the number one, number two, number three, but council certainly has taken huge steps at addressing unfunded liabilities as they relate to pension, and also looking at reserve policies. And then our public, our community has taken huge leaps in looking at our infrastructure. So all of those things, I think we don't want to get so far ahead of things that we haven't taken a really huge comprehensive look at. I think Councilmember Hahn's comments about looking at everything together and knowing what your priorities are, that kind of addresses your question there, but we have to do that. We have not done that.
Thank you.
I don't know if I answered your question well enough,
I
but
can work with that.
there's no order as of yet.
Got it.
I was gonna add a little bit of context to this. I was gonna add a little bit of context to that when council adopted the 10.5 million excess as a cap and then returned it to 12, everything that was done after that 10.5 used to go to the CIP. Then finance started asking the city manager to start clipping some of those, to start funding some of the unfunded liabilities. But the first thing that happened was the whole funds after the 10.5, when the council started this, went to CIP. That was the first council direction.
That's very good to know. Thank you.
Vice Mayor Wengraf.
Thank you. So, I guess my question is, how are we doing? Are we doing better than we were doing before? Are we doing worse? Clearly, our unfunded liabilities are going to continue to grow because as people make more money, as medical benefits increase in cost, our infrastructure is going to get worse and worse and worse. Construction costs are going up, et cetera, et cetera. So what's our temperature here? How are we doing?
I think our city is doing well financially. However, I do believe that there are a number of things that we could do better. And first of all, I think when we start talking about benefits, employee benefits, and I'm an employee, so when I'm talking about the benefits for all the employees in the organization, these are some unsustainable benefits that we have here in the city of Berkeley. So we're gonna have to take some small steps to address those things over time with our employees. They've been very forthcoming. They've worked with us on pension liability and picking up some of their pension costs. But we're also gonna have to look at medical costs, especially the medical costs. It is unsustainable and it's something that is going to plague us tremendously in future years. So are we doing good? We're making good steps toward doing well. Yes, I do believe that. Council has done some amazing things around our finances. Our staff have taken on some obligations in terms of picking up the employer's share of some of their purse costs. So we're all making steps in good direction. So yes, I think that we had a report card for the city of Berkeley. I would say our report card is probably a B-, and that's pretty good if you ask me. But I think it's because you're invested and you're making progress. And if we keep that progress going steadily, I think we will do well.
Thank you. I think that I want to build on what Councilmember Hahn said. I think it would be really useful for us to have goals that we really try to meet, because it's easy to have this stuff be invisible. And I would really like us to, as a council, to establish goals for where we want to be when, and have that established, and then try to meet those goals. I mean, we did it with the reserve fund, and that was a great step that we took, and that fund is growing, and we should be doing it with our unfunded liabilities, both our infrastructure needs and our pension and retirement benefits, our retirement benefits and medical benefits. So, I don't know if this is something that we could have a special meeting about and put our heads together and jointly come up with some reasonable and realistic goals. But I feel like we're treading, yes, we've made some very important and very good decisions in the past few years. But I also see these liabilities growing exponentially and getting more and more out of our control. And that's something that I think we need to deal with head on. And the only way I know how to deal with that is to have some goals and then figure out how to achieve those goals. And bonding, for example, is one way to achieve that, then okay, then we do that. So, I mean, that's what I would like to ask for, is some kind of session that we could have where we specifically discuss what we want and how we're gonna achieve that. Thank you.
Could be something that we could integrate into the retreat.
Yes.
So part of what we wanted to talk about was policy goals, but also maybe long-term financial goals could be part of the discussion as well. I think that's an excellent suggestion. Vice Mayor WENGRAF, I cannot go on with the discussion without asking you, Madam City Manager. You said that you think Berkeley's at B-. Where would you rate other cities?
Well,
Where are we comparatively?
I cannot rate other cities because I wouldn't be just in doing so because I haven't analyzed them. But I can take my former city, Modesto, and I can say that the employees there were aggressively reducing their benefits, their pension costs. They took pay cuts. They did a number of things to address their unfunded liabilities. And then they went out for tax measures. Those tax measures failed. So not only did the employees take, reductions in their benefits and salaries, but the community was nothing like this community in terms of the support that they give for the things that they think are important to them. They step up here. And that wasn't the case there. It was unfortunate. It just wasn't the case there. So I would say to you, if I had to compare the report card, I would say that they were probably a C- because they were very frugal. They did not go into bankruptcy as some of their neighboring cities did. So we worked hard to maintain it, but we put it on the backs of the employees. I have to admit that's what we did there. And we did not raise taxes. We didn't go out for bonds. None of those things happened there, with the exception of water. They ran their own water and wastewater departments there. So a C- only because it wasn't balanced. There wasn't a balance for both community support and investment. There was an employee support and investment or reduction. So I would say a C- because it wasn't balanced.
I guess I'll just say that not every city, you're right, not every city has such generous residents who want to support a variety of bonds and social programs. But also, I think the steps that we've been taking in the last few years are different from what other cities are doing. In terms of actually setting a reserve goal, setting aside a large portion of our excess transfer tax revenue. We could have spent that on a whole bunch of new programs, but we actually decided to invest that in long-term fiscal health because I think we felt it was extremely important to prioritize these one-time funds for addressing the long-term fiscal health of the city. Setting up these trusts. We can't dig ourselves out of a hole which admittedly was created long before many of us were elected to the city council. The many decades of degradation of our infrastructure, not fixing the waterfront, why some of the pier was let to rot and fall apart, why our streets are crumbling, why a lot of our infrastructure has not been attended to. This is decades of neglect. But we are the stewards of the city, and we're going to step up, and we're going to take responsibility of it, and we're going to make progress. So you can't dig yourselves out of a hole in 1 or 2 years, but we got a big shovel, and we're working hard to dig ourselves out as quickly as possible. So, Councilman?
Yeah, I
Vice Mayor.
Yeah. So, you talk in the report about being 100% funded on the pension and medical unfunded liabilities. And I think 100% is unrealistic because you're not paying 100% all at one time. But what do cities consider to be the optimum number, percentage? Is it 80%, 75%?
So in the past, the goal was 80%, was thought to be reasonable, but now, CalPERS has actually taken action to support and almost ensure 100% funding over time. Implementing a smoothing technique, reducing the discount rate. They're moving towards 100% funding at a point certain. And that's a proposal. And aligning that, the medical retiree benefits with CalPERS as a proposal.
Okay, and the other thing I wanted to say is that I think that we do have an extremely generous community, but I also think they have expectations. And I think that we need to deliver, frankly, on some of our infrastructure issues. Street paving being right up there at the top. I don't think we can let our streets go any longer. We're really behind, and I mean, I get emails all the time about the condition of our streets. And people resent it. People are paying a lot in taxes, especially new homeowners. And they expect to be able to drive their cars on our streets. So I just wanted to make that comment.
Thank you. So I see we have some colleagues who've already spoken who'd like to speak again. Is it okay if we go to the councilors who hadn't spoken first, and we can go back to Councilor Davila? So Councilmember KESARWANI.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this really thorough report as well as the presentation. I just have some general comments because I think my colleagues asked a lot of the really great specific questions, and I will align myself with some of their ideas. I think this report is really helpful because when you think about, what is the role of city government, I think at its most basic components, it's to pay the city workers, particularly police and fire, but also to pave the streets, as Councilmember WENGRAF said, and maintain the sidewalks and our marina and our basic core public infrastructure. And so I appreciate this report. I just had one thing I wanted to clarify. So I was just trying to put together, what portion of our budget is the personnel expenditure. So I see on page 7 you're saying 348 million. And then on page 14, the personnel costs show up as a breakdown of salary and fringe, and I was not tracking why for FY19 that page 14 says 265 million versus the 348 million on page 7. Is there an explanation for that I'm not tracking? No, I'm on the presentation, I'm sorry.
One more time, please.
So page 7 is showing personnel costs of 348 million for the current fiscal year. And then page 14, which I think is just showing.
Oh, one is general fund and one is all funds.
Say that again,
Oh, sorry. One is the general fund, the first one is just general funds.
So I'm on page 7, which is saying that it's all funds?
Yes.
Okay, so that's saying 348 million for salary, for personnel, salary and fringe, I assume. And then I was just trying to track the number on page 14 that's saying that the total salary and fringe is actually 265.9. It doesn't specify on that page whether it's general fund or all funds. The general fund figures on page 6 don't seem to align. That's saying 133 million.
It's saying 14.
So and if you want to come back to me on that, that's fine.
7. On page 14 it says 266. Well, it's slide.
So, slide 14. Thank you. come back next week, I'm not sure.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, if you can just get back to me on the clarification of those numbers. And I just wanted to make some general points. I think on the infrastructure liabilities that we have, one, if Mr. Ferris could come back, you know, I wanted to just ask you in terms of the marina deferred maintenance of $109 million.
I'll be right there.
Okay, thank you.
Just rip it up. Yes.
Yes, so, you know, the marina is kind of a prized portion of District 1. So, you know, obviously I think the whole council is really concerned about the marina fund, the structural deficit, as well as just this large deferred maintenance of over $100 million. Can you just help shed light on how will the marina master plan, or actually will that give us a roadmap for how we can begin to dig out of this deficit? Or
Yes, the BMAS, the Berkeley Marina Area Specific Plan, that is one of the main goals. Is after we're done, we should have a roadmap for financial kind of success moving forward. And so it, you know, depending on what they recommend, what is recommended, what areas can be used for different revenue sources, but we'll have that at the completion of that.
okay, and what is the time frame for beginning that work and then completing it?
So we're headed to, at the end of April, to the council to award that contract, and then anywhere from 2 to 3 years from completion. So they'll probably start in end of May, and 2 to 3 years from that point.
Okay,
But we'll know a lot as we go forward, so we'll have information as we go forward. So we're headed for completion of the plan. We're probably talking 3 years, but after a year and a half, we're gonna know a lot of information and what's viable in different sections of the marina.
okay, thank you very much. And then, since I have you up there, you know, I know the council took an action to vote to approve the MOU with our Water Emergency Transit Authority.
Correct.
And can you talk about, you know, is that, you know, I know our goal is to get this ferry at the marina, to get investment in our pier and potentially other infrastructure. What are the prospects of that and the time frame for that? Can you shed light on that?
Yeah, so what council approved was the MOU with WEDA to complete the feasibility study. We've done 2 legs of it already. This is the 3rd phase of the study, which analyzes a lot of the landside improvements needed and the breakwater. And so we're anticipating that study is going to be complete in about 8 months. All right, the WEDA board will hopefully approve it on April 4th, and then we'll begin the process of doing a contract amendment to our consultant's contract. That'll come through council about a month after that, and then it'll take 6 months to complete the study, and then we'll run through a 6-month public process, and hopefully at the end of that process we'll pick a preferred plan, and if the large-scale ferry is feasible, so by the May of 2020 or April, we plan to come back to this body with our preferred plan, and you guys will see it before that, but for approval. And then the next phase is design and planning, and the environmental, all the environmental work that needs to be done. We anticipate that's going to take 3 to 4 years, and then construction after that. So our current timeline, if all the stars align, is probably 2025 or 2026 before we're ready to have a ferry delivered.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate that. And I actually, I was wondering if Mr. Harrington could come up. I just had some questions about our long-term liabilities in terms of our deferred maintenance on our streets. And I think this kind of speaks to Councilmember Wengraf's point. Our residents do want to drive on streets and bike on our streets and avoid some of those potholes or not have to contend with that. So I think, you know, I'm just interested in your opinion. You know, we spend, I was looking at that chart in the back, you know, we spend not very much I don't want to say not very much, it's millions of dollars every year to pave the streets, but yet the capital and maintenance need is 170 million. So in terms of options to fill that gap, is it bonding? Is that what we have to look at?
So I know that question has been referred to the policy committee for discussion. And I think that Councilmember HAHN mentioned some ideas in terms of revenue bonding and leveraging some of the money that comes in on the 6 different fundings. So you get the money up front to address a lot of these problems before they become major. With streets, I mean, there's a point in the curve where you get to that if you don't address something at that point, then you move from a minor maintenance application that will extend the life of the street to a major application in terms of reconstruction or major overlays. I think, you know, the mayor made a great point about, you know, we're dealing with years and years and decades of deferred maintenance. And overall, we talked about the number here, the Bay Area number of the 9 counties is in somewhere between $3 to $5 billion in street repairs. You know, the overall, we're talking about grades, I mean, the overall grades across this country, based on the American Society of Civil Engineering, is a D-. I mean, we have done a horrible job in this nation taking care of all of our infrastructure. And we're making, you know, we're trying to make some strides right now. We did see a modest increase. I mean, it was projected to be a decrease in the PCI. It actually went up. It was, you know, stated to go from 55 to 52. It actually went from 55 to 59. So we're seeing some of those, you know, some of those changes coming in. We've got 4 major programs going on right now. We got Shattuck, we got Panoramic Hills, we've got the 18 and 19 street repaving projects are going out this summer too. So you're going to continue to see those, you know, those extension in terms of the pavement condition. But you're still trying to catch up, and a lot of our streets, I mean, they've already degraded down to, you know, a PCI of less than 10. So they're already gone. I mean, there's nothing you can do to maintain them. You just have to now get in position to, you know, do a reconstruction process on that. And then also we're looking at the fact that not only, you know, what happens is when you do the rehabilitation work, you didn't have to turn around, you gotta maintain what you just did. If you buy a new car and you don't change the oil, it's not gonna last as long. The streets are the same way. So there are a lot of challenges. The 170 million projects, you know, not only just the street, but it brings in the bike and ped, complete street process. It brings in some of the work in the storm drains, and that's the watershed master plan. It talks about the improvements to the concrete sidewalks and the you know, the ADA accessibility, the curb cuts and all that. So all that is coming into play with that 170. But there are plans, you know, I have that conversation with Councilmember HAHN, and we do have some ideas going forward that can help get more money into this process up front and leverage now to address a lot of these problems before they continue to grow and cost, you know, community more money, you know, in the future.
Okay. You know, can you clarify what policy committee are you referring to?
I think there was a report.
Facilities committee.
Yeah.
It's on the agenda this Thursday.
Facilities and infrastructure committee.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. And the other, you know, broader point I wanted to make on infrastructure that I think no one has raised thus far, but is on my mind is, you know, we're looking at, you know, this is unfunded liabilities that we've incurred. You know, I think people, you know, raise the Measure O thing, that's in the future, but there's also, you know, thinking about the impacts of climate change and the kind of new costs that we're going to incur in the future. I know that's kind of out of the purview of this report, but I just wanted to note that I know that is a big concern for us, and I think the Vision 2050 group is thinking about those costs and how we fund them. And I just wanted to express my support for doing the bond analysis so we can understand our bonding situation, our capacity. I think that's going to be really important moving forward. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let's go to
I'm
Councilor.
sorry, I'm still, I just wanted to make sure I covered all of my points. I think on the unfunded pension liabilities, I want to align myself with Councilmember Wengraf that this report is very helpful to know what the liabilities are, but I am left wondering, what do we need to do to be an A city in being responsible? How much annually should we be paying over what time period to get into a good financial position? What is a reasonable time period for this? And I also want to posit a concern or question, how does a recession scenario impact your revenue projection? It looks like your revenues are assumed to continue to grow, that we have 10 more years of expansion. I think we all recognize that's not going to happen. Did you do a recession scenario that you haven't included here?
So we know that recessions traditionally historically occur every 6 years, and we haven't hit that yet. I don't think we included, and Harry will speak to this, well, he may have considered recessionary impacts when we met with our advisory community services to talk about revenue conditions, but we also are relying on, will rely on our reserves if we do hit a recession, our stability reserve.
Okay, and can you tell me, I know the last recession was very serious, but, so I don't know if that's the best example, but I'll just ask it anyway. In a recession scenario, how much are you needing? Like how, typically on average, do you have that number of how much is needed to fill the gap?
I think the last recession we had, I think it was about, we needed to, I think it was about $10 million.
$10 million.
Right.
Okay, and that was like 2011? Oh, okay,
2008.
you're talking about 08.
Yeah,
Okay.
and
How many years were we in deficit?
Well, it was just 2-3 year cycle.
Okay.
Because what happened was we had a dip. One of the things about Berkeley was the sales value was very stable. We did not have any of the sectors of the economy that went that tanked. So we weren't that bad. Well, someone like Everyville, Stockton and all of them were in trouble. We had just about 1.0% negative in terms of our asset value revenues from our property tax. So
Okay.
it wasn't, some of the things that really had trouble with was our sales tax. We had a dip in that. We had a dip in some of our restaurants, and we had a couple of negative, but most of them held very well. And so it was, we were able to weather this storm not that bad. We didn't even lay off any of our employees. We were able to do that.
Okay.
So, but in the projections here, the sectors of, when we do projections, we look at those. And so there's a percentage in when you do your revenues where you take your marginal rates and you subtract them with your proximity of what you think it will be, and there's a factor of that. And we use those factors to determine whether the economy is going well, what are those ones that are sensitive to the rate of growth in the economy, and we do a little bit of modification with them. So when the county says we think the growth rate will be about 6%, we might change that to about 5.5 and just see, okay, maybe we need to be a little bit more conservative. So we actually add those ones into our projections. So when we say those projections are right, they have those percentages in them.
Okay, thank you, that's helpful. And so again, I just want to say that I think that I'm supportive of using our retreat to do some of this financial goal setting. I think that's going to be really important. And I just want to close by saying that I think these unfunded liabilities on the infrastructure as well as on the worker side, it does require all of us making sacrifices. So, as our city manager noted, not just workers, but as well as our residents, who I know have actually taken on a lot of sacrifice in saying yes to tax increases and bond measures. And I think it also requires responsibility of the council to make fiscally responsible decisions. And so I hope that we will take that responsibility seriously. Thank you.
Councilmember Droste?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much for your report. I really appreciate it. I agree with virtually all of my colleagues who have spoken here tonight. I agree with the mayor in that I feel that perhaps we might be under bonded. I'm also interested in seeing the comparison of projected costs and expenses from fiscal year 2012 to 2019. Did you mention that, Kate? Or at least you mentioned the vacancy, the vacancy rate. So I'm also interested in full-time employees and vacancy rates and the impact on projections. So I just want to reiterate all of that. I do have just one clarifying question for Mr. Ferris, if I can ask you a brief question. Let's see if I can find it. So I noticed that there were a few separate categories under parks, and I was just wondering if you could clarify for me in the slide presentation. Yes, thank you. On page 18.
Teresa, can you pull back the slide?
Yes, thank you. So we have 6.9 million cost estimate for park buildings and facilities, 9.9 for general parks, and then 36.9 for specific parks. And I'm just wondering if you could, and then of course 7.3 for park restrooms. I'm wondering if you could just clarify for me what is entailed in the parks general and the parks specific.
Okay, well, the park specific are items that are very specific to that particular park. So for instance, on our list, and we're gonna send you out this list, you know, at King School Park, we have pathways and stairs. At Aloni, we have pathways, lighting, and a park course, and the play equipment that needs to be done. And then something that's more generic, so on that, the park's general list are drought tolerant conversions for our medians, a lot of the ADA work, and irrigation line and heads replacement. So that's an example of more general work.
Just so more citywide work as
Right.
opposed to the park specific might be.
Right. So it may not be in the park, but it also, it's more of a major maintenance projects that need to be done.
Okay.
Okay, but we'll forward you this list.
That'd be great. Thank you. That's all I have.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's go to Councilor Bartlett, and then we're going to go to to close, the councilors would like to speak again.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a quick question or two. I wanted to also stress the importance of goal setting. I think goals for us to see as touchstones as we move along and can guide our decisions. I think we can do that at the retreat. We should definitely have goals, and also again clear charts that we can view our decisions and what's coming up, 5-year plan, 10-year plan, the sunsetting of the bonds we have, etc. And the question I'm going to ask is regarding the university impacts. Do you anticipate, I'm not sure the question is for, I guess you, Madam City Manager, do you anticipate any change in our revenues as we renegotiate our plan, our agreement with the university?
Well, it's certainly something that we're going to be taking very seriously as we look at the long-range development plans with UC Berkeley, and we'll need to do a comprehensive analysis on truly what the impacts are on our city, whether it be our infrastructure, affordable housing, everything that's related to the relationship with the university. So that's something that we'll have to negotiate, and we'll have to use some concrete evidence to support our position in securing funding. So yes, it could be, if nothing more than continuing on the current level until we can actually negotiate something more permanent and long-term.
Councilor Bartlett? Okay. Councilor Davila?
Thank you. So I just realized I had a couple more questions. One, I just wanted to state that when you talked about the 10.5 going over that cap, it would be nice to put like just a blanket percentage over every time to go towards capital improvement, to go towards the unfunded pension liabilities, so that it's a fixed amount, and then if we go over, we could allocate more, but it would just be good to just start with that. And then, I didn't see cannabis anywhere in the projected revenues, so I was curious about that. And then, you see other often on these reports, other revenue, other expenses. What does other mean? I mean, can we just define that sometimes? Please put in the parentheses like how much or whatever, like what other means. If it's like 10 things, just list it so that we have it somewhere. And then, street paving, I just have to say, oh my God, I just have to tell you this, Mr. Harrington. On San Pablo, on Addison, below San Pablo, there is a serious, somebody's gonna get killed or get in a serious accident hole. I haven't seen it, I've just felt it. No, it's really, really bad. And I always forget about it. So it's like, damn, it happened again. I'm just worried about my car, really, honestly. And anybody else, because it could be a fall, whatever, just saying. And then, in the 115 pension trust fund, we put in 4 million, right? So what have we gotten so far, I'm curious?
So we have a total of over 7 million. We have been putting money aside over time, and with this additional contribution, it brings us above 7 million.
So like, what's that interest rate like, I'm curious?
We coming back to we the outfit that's going to manage the fund. That's the reason why it's a trust fund that the city cannot touch. So it's supposed to be managed by somebody. And we're coming back to council next month to pick the person. And in the report, they will tell you the expectations that they have and the city's expectations of what the rate of return would be on an annual basis, and they will bring a report in on an annual basis to council to see.
Okay, I guess I'll hold off my next question for that time in April.
Yes.
Okay. And then I was just curious, I appreciated Councilmember KESARWANI's question about the recessionary impacts, but have you also done anything about the federal funding cuts that could come? I was just curious.
So, can you speak specifically on what federal cuts you're, okay, so.
I'm just thinking that there's probably gonna be some, and have we taken that into consideration?
So this is mostly general fund. The revenue projections were tied to our general fund.
Okay.
And in preparation for any impacts that may come from federal action, that's what our stability fund is set up for.
Oh, so that would just come into play, and, okay. Good answer, thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Harrison, WENGRAF, and then we should conclude our
Yeah,
discussion.
just very briefly, there had been a question earlier about how we look compared to other cities in terms of our pensions and healthcare, and I didn't really hear an answer to that. So I hope when we meet, we can talk about best practices in other cities. What kind of percentage of funding are they at? What have they been doing with these kind of trust funds? You know, because you mentioned this goal of 80%, but I don't know that anyone has ever really achieved that other than San Francisco, which is amazingly at 92%. So I'd like to know that as we have this discussion, how do we actually compare and who is doing the job? What are they doing differently? That would be really helpful to me. And I just have to say rhetorically on healthcare, it's not just a matter of the employees paying more, it's also a matter of us reducing our costs, which is really hard to do, but we have to consistently look at our plans. What plans are we enrolled in? What plans do we participate in most heavily? And also, how can we continue to push for single payer? Thank you.
Vice Mayor WENGRAF.
Thank you. I want to thank you for the report. And I'd like to suggest that next time you come to us with a report, that we also include in the report all of the assets that the city has. I mean, one of my concerns is that the public reading this report will get a very, very bleak picture of what's going on. And I don't think it's the whole picture. So I think that we need to balance that and let the public know, you know, we have all of these assets worth X million, billions of dollars. And that we have taken these specific steps to address our unfunded liabilities and list them. And because, you know, I'm concerned that people are gonna think that, you know, we're not doing our job. So that's my suggestion.
Madam City Manager, anything before we close this item?
Yes, just wanted to speak a little bit to Councilmember Wengraf's comments, and then I'd like to have a few closing comments. So our CAFR does really spell out this comparison that you're speaking of around our assets and our unfunded liabilities, and that is what it's there for. This report was actually specifically about future unfunded liabilities. Your request to include that, we can certainly do that in the future, but over time it's strictly been about future liabilities and not so much about showing the comparison of the mirror. That's the CAFR that does that. But we can bring information over from the CAFR and include it in this report for you. Okay. So in closing, I just want to thank the staff, Teresa and Henry and department heads for their work. And also just to say that council's made some really tough decisions. You've done an amazing job. My B- comment, I just want to really be clear about the B- comment. I have to give you an A for effort. You have done an amazing job. I just want to be clear. It's been phenomenal, the leap that you've made over the last few years. And moving forward, we still have places to go. So a B- isn't bad. I tell my kids that all the time. B- is okay. I like that A. But a B- is not bad. We are progressing. These are overachievers, but we will continue. But an A+ for effort, and thank you all so much.
On that note, thank you, Teresa and Henry. We're going to go to the next item, which is the fiscal year 2019 mid-year budget update. So you have a brief presentation,
Very brief.
and then we can take a break before we go to crime report.
So it's very brief. Basically, mid-year, we're struggling a little bit with.
I think the mic is not on.
So we're working in two systems right now, not dual books, but we're working in two systems. So it's challenging to reconcile all the information. But at mid-year, this is as of December 2018, we were at 50% of revenues in receipts and 48% in expenditures. The detail of the expenditures and the revenues are in the report and also in the attachment. And I did want to talk a little bit about the FY20, FY21 proposed budget calendar and the timeline, just to see where we are. Today we're at March 19. I'll be working with the Budget and Finance Policy Committee to determine the department presentations and the timeline for that. April 23rd, there'll be a public hearing on CDBG and ESG Annual Action Plan and funding allocations to our community agencies. On May 7th will be the proposed biannual budget presentation. On the 14th, we're going to have our first public hearing. And our second AAO annual appropriation ordinance should be approved. We'll be talking about proposed fee increases and ask that council submit their budget referrals for the FY20, FY21 biannual budget process to the city manager. May 28th, we'll have our second public hearing on the budget, and we'll also be asking council recommendation on the proposed budget. June 11th, council will have their discussion on the budget, and on June 25th, we're scheduled to adopt the biannual budget and the AAO appropriation.
Okay, thank you very much. So just want to address a couple of points in the budget calendar. The presentations of the Budget and Finance Committee, those are going to be known as a special meeting of the City Council, so any council member can attend. And it's the first time we've actually had departments present their proposed budgets to the City Council. This is a practice in other jurisdictions, including San Francisco Board of Supervisors, the City of Oakland, and I think it'll be helpful to get council input as the budget is being developed before we actually get the the actual final budget proposal, which I think is in May. So we're gonna have to work to schedule those presentations next month. And so I know that the members of the committee can work with the staff to find a couple of dates. And then also, it might be necessary for the council to appoint an alternate to that committee just to ensure that we have quorum. So that's something we can entertain. And then I will be bringing my supplemental budget recommendations to the city council on, I think it's June 11th, so that the council has it to consider before we vote on the budget at the end of June. And by then we'll have a better sense of the assumed revenues, and we can be able to make some decisions around, of the myriad of budget referrals and requests, how we can fund those additional requests. So with that, I'd like to open up for public comment on item 2. Would anyone like to address the City Council on the fiscal year 2019 mid-year budget update? Any public comment? Madam City Auditor.
Hi, good evening. So the budget season is coming up, and I look forward to participating in my first budget season. I just wanted to say I really appreciated many of the comments made earlier about long-term fiscal impact, and I think that using that as a guide in thinking about a portion of the budget, thinking about the long-term fiscal impact is really important. I wanted to commend the council members who spoke about the importance of long-term planning and goal setting. I think that having a discussion and coming to agreement on some of these really important issues with unfunded liabilities, and I know our reserve policy is at 16%, and that going further would be wonderful, and I'd love to point you to the reserves audit that was completed I don't even remember when that was completed, but I wanted to commend many of you who passed the reserve policy, and I hope that we can continue to have a reserve policy and help fund that. I know there are competing demands and obligations. There's a lot that you'll be weighing during this upcoming budget season, but I did want to just say that I think it's really important to maintain our reserve policy, and that I know other jurisdictions have adopted even a 20% or higher reserve policy. Berkeley sits on an earthquake line. That's something we point out in our report. So in addition to uncertainty in the future with regards to our revenue sources, our federal grant funding, as Councilmember DAVILA pointed out, these are some uncertainties that we need to take into consideration as we think about the long-term fiscal needs. So I just wanted to thank you all. I know these are some important decisions that you'll be making, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Is there any other public comment on item 2, the fiscal year 2019 mid-year budget update? Any other public comment? Okay, thank you. Any questions from the City Council? Councilor Dowell?
Yeah, I just had one, I think, let me find it. Yeah, I'd just like to see actuals versus projected differences, and then define other revenue. Define other, always. Just wanted to say that again. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from the council or comments? Just say that I appreciate on page 2 of the report, breaking out some of the specific tax receipts, because some of these go to the general fund, but being able to track, for example, short-term rental taxes, the recreational cannabis taxes. I'll just note that part of the reason why the fiscal 18 it's 0 is because we hadn't actually implemented recreational cannabis. And so I think we had estimated in the budget double the amount of revenue of what we received for the medical receipts. So, and as we are looking at set of regulations for adult use, delivery regulations, regulations of other license types, that will help accrue additional tax revenue as well. So even already where we're at, you know, we're at $500,000, that's gonna be significantly more for the recreational cannabis if we're assuming the doubling of the tax receipts for medical. So, Councilmember Droste.
Thank you so much for the report. I had some questions around the moving violations, and this might be a question for the city manager. I'm wondering, with the percent received, if the lower amount might be due to the struggles that our traffic enforcement division is facing in terms of staffing. If that's perhaps why we're seeing a lower number in moving violations. And I can take this question offline as well if you don't have an answer right away. So that's one question I had. And I was wondering if I could get some more clarity around the utility users taxes and the question around PG&E and the bankruptcy. And I was wondering if you're able to go into that a little bit more. It was interesting reading about that. I was wondering if when you think you'll get more information.
There were two issues that happened. We had two questions with PG&E after their bankruptcy. They sent us a check, I think about a couple of checks, about 277,000, and they put a stop to them. And then they went bankrupt with their bankruptcy stuff, and so we were supposed to go to court for them. But we called and we told them those were the franchise fees that they owe us. This is not supposed to be mixed up in their own revenues. This is the fees that they're supposed to be holding on behalf, and they said they would write those checks back. And so we're expecting that we would be talking to them, and I spoke to the finance director about a week ago, and so they're saying we should get those checks. The only one that I think should affect us are the ones that are, I think it has to do with public works. When they come into the city and tell the streets and they fix them, I think some of our staff do some of the work for them, the inspection, and then these are the ones that we think we might have trouble getting back from them. And we've referred those particular ones to the city attorney to see what we need to do. Those are the ones that we think where we might be liable and not be able to get the funding that we should get from them. And we've sent it to the city attorney, and she's working on it.
Thank you. I'll take my other questions offline.
Thank you, Councilor Dowd.
Yeah, I didn't understand what IDC reimbursement meant. On the chart on page 44, page 2 of 9.
The IDC is a overhead cost that the city or the finance department determines what overhead costs are supposed to be charged to other funds that are not general funds. So those rates are what we charge, like for the city attorney or for finance. Some of these funds that are special funds need to pay back the general fund, and so we use an IDC that we use to determine what those costs are, and these are what is transferred out. That's the allocation of the cost.
Okay. I think that was it. Let me just make sure. Yeah, that was it. Thank you.
Councilor Droste.
Sorry, I have one more question that, again, I'm happy to get the answer offline so we can move ahead with our agenda. On page 3, you mentioned in discussing the business license taxes, the increase primarily reflects the timing of the processing of business license tax remittances, and so I had just a clarification question around that and why that was. So I will ask you to provide that. If you can have that.
Okay. The business license runs just like the federal tax runs. For 2018 calendar year, they were due between January 1st and February 28th. This report is as of a half year, so which means this report is talking about revenue actuals that were received by 12/31/2018. So those revenues for the business license is not due until February 28th. And that's the timing difference. It's just like a regular IRS tax. For last year, it's due April 15th. The same thing with our business license is due February 28th. That's right.
Thank you. Councilmember Bartlett?
Thank you. I just wanted to offer a suggestion for yourself and staff and for the council at large as well, to take a hard look at the reality of this, what essentially is $1 billion of unfunded liabilities and our budgetary constraints, and to encourage us all to explore some creative financing methodologies and some enterprise solutions for the city itself, to start clawing back some of the resources that we're expending, and particularly so things involving infrastructure and commons, things that we can monetize. Other cities, larger cities that are faced dire economic straits, have created entities called asset maximization authorities, right? So I would like us to consider at least an overview. This kind of dovetails with our list of assets that my Councilmember WENGRAF mentioned, but some potential to consider in terms of maximizing our assets, because there's a lot we can do, and I think we're going to be forced to at some point.
Okay, I think your point is actually well taken, while not necessarily relevant to the report of our receipts so far. I think it's a broader question that there are a lot of really innovative financing approaches that are being pursued nationally, even new mechanisms that have been enabled through state legislation or could be enabled through proposed state legislation, whether it's the bringing back of redevelopment or enhanced infrastructure financing districts or other types of ways in which you can use tax increment as a way to fund infrastructure and other community benefits. So I think we do also have to look big picture at those mechanisms as well. It isn't just, tax bonds and taxes are one mechanism, and then moreover, how we can be competitive grants. And I know that our various departments have, grant staff do either dedicated grant work or doing grant work and then additional planning work as well. But I think there's a lot of grant opportunities in a number of areas that we are probably not capitalizing on, particularly when it comes to transportation, I know. And I think we shouldn't just think about the unfunded liabilities as the only way we're going to address them is through cutting programs, deferring projects, or taxing our residents. We need to really think outside the box and think about other ways that we can generate revenue. I think there's a lot of different approaches. And perhaps that's something we can discuss at that sort of broader financial goal setting discussion that we may have in the future. I guess one thing I'll just note with respect to the table in closing is that when it says U1 revenues, I believe it's U1 expenditures. Because we had over $5 million in U1 revenues last fiscal year, and we did expend $650,000. So just a point of clarification, I think that's expenditures. So any other questions? If not, thank you very much to Teresa. Thank you to Henry. His department collects all these taxes. And I want to thank you for all your work in the business license renewal process. I know that you're down some staff, but yet I think you make great progress, and that the follow-up work you do to ensure that we have great compliance is greatly appreciated. Thank you. Okay, so with that, we're going to take a recess, and we'll be back to go to item 3, the crime report.